Hey, I'm Simona Costantini, and I'm obsessed with helping you heal, connect to your purpose, and teaching you about all things mindset. I realized I deserved and wanted more from this crazy little thing called life, so I changed my beliefs, healed my hurt, and made it my mission to help you do the same. I'm a recovering people pleaser turned life coach and podcast producer. I teach busy business owners how to fall in love with their life and business and live it on their terms. On this show, you get everything raw and real, from inspirational guest interviews to deep dives into topics like life, relationships, business, purpose, growth, and mindset. I lay it all on the line every time. Think of this as your one-stop shop to help you live a more purposeful and inspired life. This is the Happiness Happens podcast. Are you ready to hear this inspiring conversation? Let's dive on in. What is up, everyone? Welcome to this week's episode on the Happiness Happens podcast. I'm super excited to share today's episode with you. Our guest is absolutely incredible. I'm going to tell you more about her in just a second, but first I wanted to start out by reminding you that if you're listening to this today, February 15th, it is the last day to get on the waitlist for my membership program. So all you have to do is just follow the instructions in the show notes to get yourself on the waitlist. Getting yourself on the waitlist gets you a one-on-one coaching call with me and an entire week of Voxer support. If you're not familiar with what Voxer is, it is a messaging walkie-talkie style app. So we really go through everything that you need for an entire week, and this is just a bonus from being on the waitlist and registering for one of the 4 levels of the membership program. This membership is called the Happiness Happens Today membership, and it is the life coaching membership that you need to transform your mindset, transform your life, and transform your business. This membership is for service-based entrepreneurs looking to transform burnout, self-doubt, and people-pleasing into self-confidence, self-empowerment, and alignment so that you can show up as the CEO of your business, serve your clients fully, become really rooted in your why, and scale your income massively. I want you to think about something for a second. How would your life change if you learned how to master all of the different mindsets that pop up in entrepreneurship? Fraud mindset, imposter syndrome, scarcity mindset, and how to really be the CEO in your business. Or what would it look like if you could stop doubting yourself after hours spent on social media comparing yourself to other people online? Or how would it feel if you felt really, really confident in what you did today and knew at the core of your heart that that was good enough? What would it feel like if you stuck to your boundaries and didn't bend over backwards to please your clients? Or if you knew how to release the energy that you absorb and really navigate the mental exhaustion that you experience from holding space for the people that you help every single day. It would probably feel really nice to be able to shut off your mind and to step into self-care without feeling really guilty about it. And I also want you to think about what it would mean to you to be really confident in yourself, really confident in your impact and the transformations that you make for the people that you serve. But also, how would you show up in your business if burnout was a thing of the past? I love this membership the most because it's community. So what would happen in your life and in your business if you were surrounded by a community of people who understood you, who deeply felt and shared in your wins and in your struggles? I want you to really think about how much your life would change if you woke up every single day, every single morning, knowing that you're good enough and that you didn't have to worry about how it was all going to work out. All of these different things that I just listed are all things that I used to experience on a daily basis. And sometimes I still do. I have spent years unraveling the stories that made up who I was and how I showed up in my business. So answering all of these questions, I would imagine that it feels a lot like being relieved because you know how to navigate that very, very real imposter syndrome that creeps in, and really confidently owning every single part of your mindset. It would be being at peace with everything that you create, everything you put out into the world, and all the people that you help today. And it would really feel like knowing that you showed up and served your community in the best possible way, whether people tell you the impact that you had on them or not. You would be really good to sticking to your boundaries, and you'd be able to emotionally detach from the space that you hold by supporting and serving your clients every single day. You wouldn't feel guilty anymore. You would actually feel really confident in yourself and the transformations that you create. And honestly, burnout, that's something that we're leaving in the past. So tell me how much your life would change if you had all of these tools and all of these resources right now at your fingertips. And a bonus, the community to keep you going when things get hard. We all know as entrepreneurs that your mindset is key in growing your business. You can have the best service in the whole wide world and every single good intention. But if you don't feel like you're good or deserving enough, you will always feel like something is missing. And honestly, one thing I know for sure is that you do not always need a one-on-one coach, but you always need a community. You always need some kind of guidance. You always need an opportunity to grow. And that's the exact reason why I created the Happiness Happens Today membership. I really feel like everyone deserves to have support in their business and in their growth without having to pay insane prices to have it. Community was a game changer in my business, and it really helped me navigate a lot of the ups and downs and has really been the backbone to my success. If I didn't build community, if I didn't have a community supporting me, if I didn't have friends who understood what I was going through, my business wouldn't be here today. And let's be honest, sometimes you really just need someone to tell you that it's going to be okay and to help you get back up when you're down. So there are 4 different levels to this membership, and I'm linking all of them here. You still have some time. If it's Monday the 15th, you still have some time to get on the wait list, and I really suggest that you do so. I'm really excited to share this membership program with you, and I know that you are going to be just excited as I am to get in there. Okay, so let's move on with our podcast episode today. Today we're speaking with Gunjani Patel. Gunjani is a licensed mental health counselor, life and wellness coach, speaker, a writer, and now a podcast host of Traumatic Transformations. She runs a private practice called G Patel Counseling in San Diego, California, and Florida. She specializes in depression, anxiety, trauma, addictions, grief, and loss. She's also a new mom to a 22-month-old, hyper-energetic, but a very lovely boy, and is in the process of relaunching herself after being on a hiatus for the last few years. Her newfound vision in life is to spread mental health awareness and normalize it, to break the stigma associated with help seeking. So to bridge that gap, she recently launched a podcast called Traumatic Transformations. In each episode, she plans to share science-backed actionable tips, tools, and strategies to help people learn more about mental health, be inspired, get hopeful, change mindset, and live the best versions of themselves. You can follow her on Facebook and Instagram. Her handle is at G Patel Counseling, and you can also subscribe to her podcast. It's called Traumatic Transformations with Gunjani Patel. All of these will be linked in the show notes for you. So I hope you enjoy this episode. There's so much incredible insight and so much to learn. Gunjani, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here and have this conversation with you today.
Oh, likewise, Mona. I've been working. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time because I was like, oh, wow, this must be important that I had booked it like months in advance. So I'm excited to be on the show with you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. I'm just so excited to chat with you because here's the thing. I chatted with a lot of different coaches, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of authors, and very, rarely do we actually get to talk to a licensed therapist, which I think is really important because I think that sometimes the lines between coaching and therapy can get a little bit blurred.
Yes.
And so I want to talk about like the difference between that today. But first, before we dive into all of that, I would love if you could just share with us a little bit about, your journey, how you got here today, doing what you're doing.
Wow. So tell me a little bit of a timeline that I have because I could literally keep going forever. So yes, so the way this whole entire process for me started was I grew up in India. I live in Southern California now, but I grew up in India for most part of my life. I came here for an undergrad. When I was growing up in the South Asian community, it was very like, oh, you either grew up to be a doctor or an engineer, in back in the 90s. And, I was just like, oh, okay. So I grew up wanting to become a doctor, just wanting to treat people and do stuff and help people. But my life had other plans for me. So my preteen and my teen years of my life were not the greatest. So I went through some sexual molestation. I mean, I talk about it
Wow.
now as if it's just, but
Yeah.
after a lot of healing, I'm in this place. And I talk about this on my podcast. But, it's just, I went through that experience of my life. Then there was a part of my life where right around there in my teen years, I had like third-degree burn. So I almost like died from that accident.
Oh my
And then it
God.
was right before one of the very important exams of my life that determined the trajectory. Because in India, the education system is like Britain, where it's very different than what we do here.
Right.
So it kind of depended on whether I would get science. You had to have very high percentage. I used to go to boarding school, so it was like things got a little muddy there. So I didn't get to be in that field like I had anticipated. Then I got a opportunity to come here to study for my undergrad. My parents were very graceful and provided me that opportunity, so I took it. I came here for my undergrad. I ended up picking nutrition science because I'm in dietitian at the point, dietetics, because I was just like, hey, it's in the helping field. It's in the, I would work in the hospital with patients. It would be similar. The goal would be to help people. So I was
Right.
like, okay, I was able to take that as a next compromise and work through that. So then I ended up coming to America. I went to University of Cincinnati and studied dietetics. I then realized after coming back where, it was one of those where I went back and I told my parents that, because they still live in India and they always have lived in India. So I went back and I was like, hey guys, I want to, I can still go to med school and I want to study. And my parents were very conservative, very traditional. And they were like, no, if you keep changing careers and keep changing these stuff, you're going to be in school forever and we need to get you married and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm only 20. I don't want to be married, but okay. So long story short, so we did that and they were like, no, finish what you started and that's what you're going to do. So I said, all right, fine. I finished. I got my nutrition. I did nutrition science, got my degree. Then fast forward a few years later, I ended up marrying a man in North Dakota. He taught entrepreneurship, really amazing person, but our marriage didn't work out. But that led me into the next phase of my life, which was, I ended up studying therapy, which is counseling psychology. I was in North Dakota studying, doing nothing, as in, literally there were like towns that were like 60 people big. I mean, it was literally in the middle of nowhere. So
Wow.
I needed to do something with my time. And I like psychology. I figured, I should just look into, he taught entrepreneurship. And I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. I always wanted to have my own business or a non-profit or something someday. So I was like, why don't I just look into this and see, what happens? So then I did that program. And one of the things our program required was, you have to seek therapy in order to be a therapist, because you should know what it's like to be on the other side of the couch. And I was like, what do you mean? Nothing is wrong with me. What am I going to seek therapy for? In the meantime, all these things that I just told you were wrong. And I was going, dealing with the repercussions of a lot of that. So I was like, oh, wow, this should be interesting. I go in and then a can of worm opens and rest is history. I'm so glad, though, that I went through that experience, or I was made to go through that experience. But, it just, I wouldn't trade it for anything else. And I am 100% a clinician that I am as a result of that experience. And the woman that treated me at the time, she was a psychologist, and she had, she was a qualified EMDR specialist, which is what I do. It's a very specialized trauma treatment, evidence-based, been around for 50 years now, but mostly used for people who came back from combat and PTSD. But now we use it for anything and everything. And it's just amazing. It's a different modality than just talk therapy. So again, it really inculcated the culture, or the specialty that I would end up in as a result of the work that I did with her and how I healed and all the stuff that I did with her. So yeah, that's my story in a nutshell.
That's crazy. You know what I'd love to, though, is the fact that you were able to sort of take all these different situations. I think one thing that really stands out to me here is that you changed what the expectation was. Do you know what I mean? Like, you changed what you thought would happen. And it's kind of like just a really nice reminder that the path isn't always linear, and it's not always what it sets in front of you. And like, if you just trust that you're following the right path, regardless of what that path is, you're going to end up where you're meant to be regardless. So I think that's so important.
that trust part didn't come till quite some time, quite till in my,
Mm.
late 20s, which is when I ended up in therapy, and all the things that happened in my life to learn that was something that I definitely ended up learning as one of my life lessons,
Yeah.
that the path isn't linear and that you just need to put your trust out there. But when you have a lot of unresolved trauma, or when you have a lot of unresolved baggage, so to speak, from your past, if you don't heal from that, it's hard to see life from this point of view. And
Mm.
that's where, after my healing, after a lot of my work, after I became a clinician and I had been doing it for a while, I realized that, you know what, yes, you have to set goals, you have to have visions, but your vision has to be in alignment with who you are, your values, and your purpose in life.
That's really, really important. And so the type of therapy that you do now, how does it differ from just regular like talk therapy?
So I specialize in depression, anxiety, PTSD, so a lot of trauma, addiction,
Wow.
grief, and loss, and that's my jam. Like I have been doing that for 12 years now. I own my private practice. I'm licensed in the state of California and Florida, and so what the way. So I was treated with EMDR as a part of one of my trauma treatments when I was doing some work in terms of my therapy. And then I went out there and became I specialized in it because it was so useful. It's a lot of subconscious programming. It's like I won't get into the details of that. People can go on my website. It's gpatelcounseling.com/EMDR. It stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So a lot of times when you talk about certain things, and I teach this, like I do a lot of talking engagements on addictions and trauma recovery and trauma informed care. A lot of times when people have been through hardcore trauma, it's difficult for them to talk about certain things, like
Mm.
it's hard to talk about, hey, I got raped, or hey, I lost my child. It's like, how do you sit there and talk about some of those things? Because they are the way trauma works is it affects the reptilian part of our brain, the fight or freeze responses. And then, the last thing we do is put a perception or a thought or belief about it, through our prefrontal cortex, just the brain part of our trauma. Our body carries a lot of trauma too, so it's like very important that you get help for it as soon as any traumatic event that you've been through. But a lot of times people are not ready. A lot of times people numb their feelings. A lot
Yeah.
of times people deny those feelings, so those things are very difficult, and thus it's really important to go seek help from the right person who specializes in it. Or because trauma informed care is very different than regular therapy where you just talk to your therapist, or even coaching like you were going to discuss earlier. And trauma informed care is about absolutely building trust with the people that have been through certain things, empathizing with them and putting them in the driver's seat. Because the first thing that happens when you go through a traumatic event is a lot of people end up with, I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, I feel powerless, I feel helpless, I feel trapped in my situation, or whatever it's been, if they haven't healed from it. So a lot of things happen as a result of being through a traumatic event or a traumatic phase of your life. So
Mm.
just talking about it a lot of times doesn't heal it completely for a lot of people I've seen. So with the EMDR, we do a lot less talking, but you move your eyes left and right. So the idea is you connect your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere of your brain. So a lot of times people know what they want to feel, but they don't feel it. So this kind of therapy, it's very similar to hypnotherapy. It's different, but it's all similar in the subconscious reprogramming part of hypnotherapy. So you're literally affecting the subconscious part of your brain and dealing with your issues from the root of your issues by not having to be head on with them, because it's very difficult to be head on with something that you feel traumatized by.
Wow, that sounds really a really interesting technique. Like I've never heard of that before. I mean, I've done therapy
Most people
and
haven't. Yes.
yeah, and
Yes.
I've done therapy and I've done different things and like different techniques while I was in therapy, but I've never heard of that technique before. So it's very interesting.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, how do
Yes.
you like protect your own emotional well-being and your own sort of spirit and soul, if you will, when you're doing these very heavy and powerful sessions with other people?
Absolutely. Good question, because that's one thing that I get a lot from a lot of people. But I think as a part of my training, and I guess just as becoming a therapist, one of the biggest things that we're trained in is to empathize with ourselves, our patients. But empathizing, meaning you put yourself in someone else's shoes. And really, I recently wrote a blog article on empathy and boundaries. And it's so important just for any relationship, for it to be healthy, they have good boundaries,
Right.
if, in order to have deep connection with some people, you just want to be able to make sure where you let them know what is okay with you, what is not okay with you, the whole professional part of our life. And I think we're taught, and to me, life and therapeutic experience is a very holistic experience. It's like a mind, body, brain, and soul experience. It's not just everything is in your head or everything is in your mind experience. When I see my clients, I genuinely, I know I do it as work, but when I'm at work, I feel so passionately about it that when I'm there, I lose myself in terms of who I am and my values are. I still recognize it because there are certain things that come up that, trigger some parts of me when certain people say something, but that's something that we are trained in, and we're trained to know what comes up. And then we go to our own therapist or consult, that we do with our supervisors or other clinicians that we work with to figure out that stuff. But in therapy, we're taught to maintain good boundaries with our clients so we don't take our work home. Because with the amount of stuff and the kind of stuff that I do, like I mentioned, it can be very heavy, deep, and dark, after like 6 sessions of that in a day. And to me, I know that I can only handle 6 1-hour sessions with this work, because after that, I'm burnt out, I'm drained. When I first started my career, that was something that I wasn't sure, and I didn't learn, but I learned it the hard way.
Yeah.
And now I know what works for me and what doesn't, because in the beginning, I would be so carried away. And I got, in 4 years, I got so wiped out and so burned that I know better now. I came with practice. Absolutely.
It's fair. It's fair. It does. It totally does. And I really think that that's, I don't know. I think that it's just, it's very cool to me. Like I always wondered, like, how do you disassociate? How do you sort of, navigate that? And, in terms of like the coaching and therapy difference, just super quick, we don't have to go huge into it, but I would love to know a little bit of the difference.
So I did my, the research and thinking. Like I've been on podcasts before, you, and I've discussed this very topic. And I think I'm still learning that part of my journey, because so with therapy and coaching, with therapy, one of the biggest things that we do is we treat mental health, we treat mental illness. Whereas with coaching, it's like, so I market myself as, in the beginning when I started, my private practice, I used to just market myself as therapist. And what I was sensing was the stigma associated with therapy and mental health, that I'm not crazy. And it's like, you don't have to be crazy. And, it's just people associate crazy with schizophrenia, but depression is also a mental illness. And it also can be very difficult for people who appear very high functioning. They go to their jobs, they're in their families, but yet they go through depression. And just mental health has such a bad rap. So when I started that, as just marketing myself as therapist, I would notice that a lot of people were not okay with that. But then I also attached life and wellness coach as one of my titles. And I think people were more open to seeking help because my clientele is very high functioning people like you and I, but still going through rough patches in their lives. I go through rough patches in my life even now. So, and that's okay. But most people don't realize that it's okay to go through difficult times and seek help, because they think seeking help is a sign of weakness. Whereas in our world, we think seeking help takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of, effort and time and strength to call someone and ask them for help, just in general. So I was noticing, and then, first I was like, oh, I guess there is no difference, but there is a difference, because with coaching, they don't treat the root of the issues. They don't treat mental illness and in the therapy world, and again, even there's nuances in the therapy world where, there is a clinical world and then there's a counseling world. I was trained as a counseling counseling psychology, but now my title in California is licensed professional clinical counselor. So I had to go out there and, learn or take a few courses that, entail diagnosing and labeling, because in the counseling world, there's no labeling. It's like the idea is that you're helping and more coaching approach. But in the clinical world, and obviously there is a place for label. It's like, if we don't know what we're treating, how would we know how to treat it? And obviously there are studies done on, okay, if one person is dealing with this kind of depression, or other people people who are feeling depression will go through similar things. So it has a time and place. It's not to sit and judge people. It's not to sit and label people, but it's to treat them to get them the best outcome that they're looking for. So with coaching, it's very similar, where they don't treat, and you can, you can, again, just like therapy, you specialize in certain things. With coaching, the coaching is a very solution oriented world, but and the line is blurry for me here, because to me, I'm very solution oriented as a person. Like, I like to graduate people once they come see me. There are certain people that go to therapy for 10 years, and I tell them that we're not a good fit, because I'm not your rent-a-friend. I'm not, someone that you just see every day for the rest of your life. And some places and some clients I know, like, if when I help a lot of my addiction people, I know that they need that ongoing support, and that's a different kind of approach, and that's a different kind. So it's very individualistic. So I tailor my needs based on people. But in terms of coaching, they don't treat, mental health. So they treat as in, hey, are you going through certain things in life that you need help with? So it's very like, oh, you just went through a divorce, I'm a divorce coach. Or, hey, your family is suffering from mental health and mental illness, I'm a mindfulness coach. Or, so it's like, and Tony Robbins is a life coach, so it's like different people a lot of people can become coaches, because it's a very short training and a short program. They don't treat mental health and mental illness, whereas it's very solution oriented. You're looking for some certain things to grow in your pivot or upgrade in your life, and you go to coaches. So to me, a lot of people come to me, for life skills, where a lot of, high functioning people, it's very treatment based, as in, these are my treatment goals. These are the things that I feel struck with, and these are the things I'm struggling with. So can I help you? They might not have any mental illness, but they just need to upgrade or pivot in their life that they otherwise are stuck from not being able to get help from friends and family. So that's a little bit of my
I like that. I really like that a lot, because I'm a life coach, and yes, I never would sit here and pretend that I will help you navigate like mental illness like that. I'm not
like, if someone is
pretend.
going through depression, you will not treat that, but you'll turn to someone else, but yet you'll treat them with other things that they need in terms of that.
Exactly. And what's interesting too, and what I love, and why I wanted to ask the question, is that I think that there's so much value, especially for coaches, or if you're a coach listening to this or what have you. Like, I've worked alongside therapists with my clients. Do you know what I mean? Like, hand in hand with all of their doctors and all of that different kind of stuff, because it's a different technique, it's a different approach, but you don't have to be like the be all end all. You know what I mean? Like, you can work alongside other practitioners to really help someone get a holistic perspective, right?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because even in the trauma world, I believe in holistic interdisciplinary team, because, I send a lot of my people to acupuncturists or massage therapists or life coaches or chiropractors or naturopathic doctors or nutritional counseling, or, so like Reiki or energy medicine. So they're all these, to me, at the end of the day, healing or goal, becoming the best version of yourself requires one person. Just like you can't have one partner meet all your needs, similar with mental health or goals, where one person cannot meet all your needs. So it's really important that you seek those needs from different avenues of life and different ways of, learning and becoming a better version of yourself, so you don't end up feeling stuck, or you don't end up feeling so overwhelmed.
I agree with that a lot. And in terms of healing, you said the word healing. So what would be something that's crucial for someone to do as part of their healing journey if they're just starting?
One of the first step to healing, I think, is just recognizing that there's something off, because a lot of people don't recognize that there's something off, and thus they continue to, stay and in that cycle, and that cycle is perpetuated with time. Because one of the biggest things I find, when we don't deal with something in our life, if something carries an emotional charge in our life that we don't work through, and 10 years, 20 years, 30 years later, if it's still bothering you, then you're not over it. If you're not over it by yourself, then absolutely go seek help from someone else, because there are blind spots that you are not able to see or work through, that somebody else might be able to help you get there much quicker. So the biggest thing is, like, even with the MDR, like I tell people, as soon as, like, the people that have graduated with me, it's like when I say, okay, you're good to go, if anything else happens, my number, just give me a shout. Same thing with me. If there's something else happens, I call my therapist or my consults, and we go and work it out, and it's done. I don't have to keep going through it or being stuck in that cycle. And one of the things that I notice in trauma is that if you don't take care of your issues, they continue to compound. Your feelings continue to exacerbate and get worse over time. Your emotions get more intense, because your emotions are like your alert system in your body. They try to tell you, hey, something is off, look at it, pay attention to it. It's not good or bad. It's just an alert system that something is going on in your life that is not working at this point, or pay attention to it and do something about it. Unfortunately, in our society, in our culture, we don't grow up with a lot of emotional intelligence, or don't talk about it, because it's considered weakness. But it plays to our detriment, because just like intellectual IQ, there is EQ. So if you know what you are feeling, where you're feeling it in your body, what's going on for you, you can be aware and learn how to manage them. But that's what a lot of people learn in therapy, psychoeducation. So a lot of times, just when you're first starting, just recognize something is off, try to seek help, or plugging to podcasts like this, or reading materials that are out there, because there's so much knowledge. If you've been through it, the chances are there are hundreds of people at any given time is going through that exact same thing. We just don't know it because we haven't connected with them. Like, your podcast is a very specific niche and audience, right? Same with my podcast. We have a specific need and audience. They're connected to us because they can relate to our stories and the things and the people that we bring to on the shows. So very similar. If you're going through it, you don't have to go through it alone. And I'm very big on happiness is not a choice, because some people genuinely want to be happy. They want to do anything and everything to be happy, but their brain or their biochemical reactions in their brain do not allow them that, space. But suffering is a choice. You do not have to go through it alone. You absolutely can go and get help for it. It doesn't have to be therapy, because I realize that as much as I would love for everybody in the entire world to be in therapy, not everybody goes to therapy, So therapy is not probably the only option for you, but there are tons of other things. There are communities, there are groups, there's all this social media, there's all the digital world now that we're so easily connected with each other. So you can absolutely get help, but just become aware of what's going on, what is not happening right, what would you like to change, and then what to change about whatever you are stuck in. But if you don't know what you want to change or what's going on, then you can't, there's nothing wrong, right? You just keep repeating the same patterns and cycles over and over.
That's such a good point. It's so true, because, if it's like with anything in life, like if you don't address the root problem, or, like stop or pause, or like hard stop in, even like a negative thought that you're having, that you're letting yourself spiral. If you don't stop, you're just going to continue on, and you're just going to keep going. And then by the time you realize it's next Wednesday and you've been miserable every single day. So I like that what you said, like suffering is a choice, because you're kind of making the choice to like not stop the thought.
Absolutely. Like I didn't realize, I wish I had learned that when I went into therapy. I was like, oh, this is my life. What do you mean? And I wish I knew, that I could go to a therapist. It was a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. It was not easy, but the way she walked me through that entire process, like some days I would come back from therapy and I literally felt like I got hit by a train, but I wouldn't be who I am today. And speaking, like a lot of times I hear people like, oh, you just turned 40. You have so much energy. Like you have so much life into you. And I'm like, that came after a lot of work. I wasn't just like this, but now because of that experience, I have to develop daily disciplines, daily habits, daily thought patterns. My mindset is very different as a result of it. So it takes a lot of work and experience to get there. But if you don't start, you'll never get there.
That's so true. It's so true. And I think that this is like the whole thing, like it's similar to what you were saying at the beginning of the show with how much you've, pivoted in your life and how different like your journey has been. If you're kind of always going like, expecting that, things will continue on and, you'll just keep repeating the same patterns and that kind of thing, like that's what's going to manifest in your life. It's like not until you just like, decide that you deserve more. And even if you feel terrible about it, even if you feel like it will not work, even just acknowledging that,
Yes.
like you said before, acknowledging that, you
Uh-huh.
want something different, and then you try
Absolutely.
again. And I
Yep.
think this is the thing too with healing of any kind. And a point that I always like to stress on my show is that I don't think that, happiness is sunshine and rainbows 24/7.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
It's not. Happiness
It's
is a
not
result of like the
normal to be
work.
like that. Yes.
Yeah. I know, you're right. It's not normal to feel like that every single day. Like wake up and be like, "Oh my God." Like it's
Hi.
great. Like if you do wake up like that every day, like power to you. But and it's amazing if you do, but then it like sort of discounts like, the days that you don't feel as good. You feel like there's something wrong with you. You know what I mean? Where it's
Absolutely.
like my
Yes.
goal always in these conversations is to demonstrate that healing is not linear, but also like everyone goes through something, and like you're allowed to wake up upset one day. Like,
Yes, yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that because this is what happens. I think we have a unrealistic expectation when we're younger, or somehow we just feel that somebody just told us that we have to be happy all the time. Unfortunately, and this is one of the lessons. Like I wrote recently. I wrote a blog on 5 lessons that I learned in my late 30s that I wish I knew when I was in my 20s. And one of the things that I mentioned there is that in terms of suffering or pain or like after every, I truly believe that after every valley there is a mountain, and after every mountain there is a valley, and that's how we learn, we grow, and we evolve, and what that we are placed on this planet to evolve as our into our higher beings. If we are When we are happy all the time, we don't appreciate things. If we're happy, we
yeah,
appreciate things when we are not happy. We appreciate things when we are in our lower points of our lives, when we are faced with suffering. So I now, looking through my journey, I look back at my suffering and I really thank it, and I feel that it was a gift because it truly molded me into the person that I was, and I wouldn't have gotten wiser if it wasn't some of the lessons that I learned as a part of those tests that I was given in life. I feel like life is the only place where we get the test first and lessons later, so
of
it's
course.
just same patterns keep repeating over and over till we get it. Say, it's like if you didn't have a good relationship with one of your parents growing up, you end up in a bad relationship. If you don't heal from that relationship or from that breakup, you attract the same person that you were almost in a relationship with prior, or very similar, and it keeps happening over and over till we get it, till we heal from it, till we repair some parts of our inner child that was stuck back with that things that happen in very younger parts of our day. So I'm just giving this relationship as an example where, it's like at some point of our life, we all have to look at something. I mean, we all have to work on something. So when we are in that lower points of our lives, it's meant to teach us lessons. So if we ask ourselves the right questions, instead of why is this happening to me, why me, why do good things happen to bad things happen to good people, ask yourself, what lesson is this trying to teach me? What am I learning from this? And what can I do in order to get better at this? So that next time, because that builds resiliency and strength. So that next time when that happens, if you fell once, you knew how to get back up. It's just a matter of how
Mm.
fast you get back up the next time, because we keep falling in life. That's just how it is. So the expectation, like I know at this point, I appreciate the good times, and I'm in full gratitude of the times that are good or okay. But I also know that it's temporary and it's not always going to be like this, because there are lessons that I'm still meant to learn and grow in. So I don't stay stuck and dwell on my bad times, because then I ask myself, what am I learning? What could I be better? This is trying to teach me, and how can I learn from this so I get to the better version of myself than I was before I was faced with it.
I love that I really like that, because you're sort of challenging yourself to think differently about the situation, but you're also honoring the space that you're in right now and being like, yep,
Absolutely.
this is
Because the
where we
more
are.
we resist it, the more it surfaces. The more we resist it, the more it harder it gets, the more
Mhm.
difficult it gets. So then it's like, wait, what is happening? What am I learning? What am I to do differently?
I love that a lot. I love that a lot. You mentioned a little bit earlier about stigma surrounding mental health. And do you feel like, given the pandemic and given everything that's been going on over this last year and a bit, um, you know, well, I guess, yeah, a year. It's not been more than a year. I was like, hold on, how quickly?
You're
like,
still not in 2020 when we're recording this. So for 2 more days.
oh my gosh. Do you think that there's still the same stigma around mental health as previously?
Yes and no. So I'll tell you a funny secret, because when I was graduating, my counseling program in 2008, as a part of my master's thesis, I had to study something. And I was in North Dakota, where there is nobody, and it's very stoic, conservative population, very similar to the population that I grew up in India. And back then, nobody was trying to go to therapy. Mental health was for crazy, and and it still is. So when I studied that in 2008, I was just like, oh, wow, what? Men, especially older men, didn't tend to seek help and didn't go to therapy. And, it was that was my findings. And so I studied stigma associated with mental health. And I really was very into that topic. So I was like, oh, wow. Well, fast forward 12 years later now into 2020, because my practice like literally pivoted, as a result of COVID, and because of what I do. And obviously people are finding themselves in a situation that's very difficult in terms of their relationship with their spouses, in terms of being stressed and overwhelmed, in terms of being able to, it's just, we're not used to being in each other's faces 24/7. And that's what we're faced with in this year. And that's been difficult. I get that. But I think it presents us with a challenge, as in, what can we do? How can we learn from it? How can we change our mindset and our perception from it, so that if you can get through this year or this pandemic, you will be able to get through anything else in life. It's just one of those things where this year has been quite traumatic for a lot of people. So, and that's one of the reasons why, actually, I was working part-time, because I have a 2.5-year-old. So I wanted to, till he became three, I didn't want to go to work full time. But this year presented with a different opportunity. And that's why at the end of the year, because I was dealing with my own postpartum depression stuff, partially, that I was just like, what am I going to be, now that I have a child and all this stuff, like, who am I? Yeah. And I almost dealt with that identity place of my life, where I was just like, okay, what am I doing? I'm a mom, but I also am a woman. I also have a career that's important to me, and I loved, and I want to continue, and all that stuff, as I was going through this year. So a couple of friends, like one of my friends of friends died by suicide, because of postpartum depression. She was in her 30s. And a couple other things, like this year, just COVID, George Floyd. There was another actor who died by suicide in India, and he was very young, and everybody started talking about mental health. So this year has been just very interesting for a lot of people in a lot of ways. And that's one of the reasons why I started my podcast, because I was like, I know not everybody goes to seek help. And I know a lot of people need help, but because of the stigma associated with it. And that's one of the reasons why I was like, yes, there's stigma. So what can I do to break the stigma? And because the reason there's stigma, because people are misinformed. People think therapy is something that therapy is not. And I'm so glad that I'm glad to be talking to you about this on your show, so that we can, demystify some of these misconceptions that people tend to have as it comes to therapy. It's just a place you get support from, because sometimes you get the support from your friends and family, but then there's always bias associated with it, or there's always trivializing, like, oh, get over it, or it's no big deal. But when you go to therapy, it's an amazing experience, because people who go to therapy take care of you. Therapists know how to make sure that you are well treated, just like you'd go to, a dentist, or just like you'd go to a physician. So I think the stigma is decreasing, because I mean, obviously, because of my work, obviously people, get a hold of me in both states. So to me, I don't see it, but I know that it exists. And I know that I have to do stuff in order to reduce the stigma associated with trauma, reduce the stigma associated with mental health, because it exists, it's there. Why don't we live in a world where we normalize therapy, we normalize mental health, so that we are kinder to each other, and we create a place for our next generations of children. And and especially this year, I was like, I have a kid, so I have a responsibility now to leave him and his friends a world where therapy is considered normal. If his mom is a therapist, then it's okay to come to therapy, and you become a better person as a result of being in therapy. So it's not there as much, but it depends on who you're talking to, what part of the world that person comes from, their background and their worldview of things. So
that's a really, really good point. And I'm really glad that you said that. First of all, I just want to acknowledge, I'm so sorry to hear about your friend. That's very difficult. But secondly, I think that it's really important too, to just acknowledge that people have different opinions based off of where they've grown up. Like I always say, people do the best they can with what they have, regardless if it's the right thing, quote unquote, or regardless if it's like, you know, maybe something that you would or wouldn't do yourself. Like people only know as much as they know. So, you know, I always just wonder and think like, if we could just live in a world that was just a little bit less judgmental towards other people, even if you don't agree with them, maybe try and understand why something is from their perspective, why they think like that, and why that specific perspective is so important. You know what I mean? Like you don't need to agree. No one's saying agree. But it's like honoring somebody else's opinion, and then you create trust, then you create a bond, then you create an opportunity to have a different conversation and start to change it that way.
Right.
I don't know.
And sometimes it's not even about changing the other person. You know, I think sometimes it's just being able to hold space. Like, and I teach this to a lot of my couples because I do couple therapy. You know, it's like, sometimes it's just, if we lived in a world where it's okay to be okay and agree to disagree on something that we're not agreeing on, you know, being able to hold space for someone else's view, even if you don't agree with it. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to change it. You don't have to understand, because I was taught and as a part of my teaching and training in therapy, where you can never understand someone unless you've been through that exact same thing that they have. And even if you have been through that exact same thing, the belief systems and the values that they have is based on where they grew up, their culture, their race, their parenting, their teachers, their people that they associated with. So in any given situation, two people can look at it very differently. So you cannot understand, but you can try to put yourself in their shoes and be non-judgmental. Empathy is being non-judgmental, being able to figure out what emotions that person might be feeling and communicating with them as in, hey, I got you back. I'm not here to fix your problems. I'm not here to do anything. I'm just here if you need anything, and I'm just here to listen. And that can be so healing and so trust building for the other person who is going through issues, that, you know, it's just, like you said, if you lived in a world where we just had empathy for each other and each other's values, we don't have to agree with each other's values, but we can see that this is their worldview, it's working for them, then hey, that's okay. As long as we don't shove it down each other's throats, then we can still coexist in a space where we don't agree. You're never going to meet a person where you agree on everything. My husband and I don't agree to everything, you know.
Exactly.
We can't, but we can hold space for, hey, that's our view, this is my view, and it's okay that we have our views and our own worlds of looking at things.
I totally agree. And especially like you were saying, like in the, you know, in the midst of the pandemic, when people were all in this lockdown and all this different stuff, and it's like, you're forced to sort of be with your significant other, your kids, or you're this or you're that, like family members that you live with, what have you. But it's kind of like, we're never have had that in our lives. You know what I mean? And like, I think like my fiance and I, we had like 3 months straight of where we stayed in the same basement apartment together for 3 months straight. And like, I look back on it though, and it was like some of my favorite memories, because I know that we'll never get that time again. But also like in the moment, not every day is like easy. You're not going to agree to do the exact same thing at the exact same time every single day. And so it's like, how do you open the communication lines? Do you know what I mean? Like, what are you doing to give yourself the opportunity to open up those lines? That's so important, I think.
I so agree with you, because I think that's one of the reasons, and that's one of the things that I am seeing in pandemic, where, you know, families are in that space that they've never been with each other. I was actually talking to a couple of my friends about this today, this exact same topic, where I've seen a rise in domestic violence in terms of, you know, marital discourse, because it's like, oh, you had work to go to and you would ignore the issue and you would come back, and then by then you'd be so tired that you wouldn't discuss these things. So it's like, oh, forgotten. But the deep issues that it leaves in your minds and in your lives, if they're not sorted out, at some point you will. I mean, there's a reason why in America 50% of the marriages end up in divorce. You know, 60% of second marriages end up in divorce. So if we don't communicate with each other, or if we don't know how to communicate with each other, I mean, that's an issue to work on in itself. It's like a lot of times we don't look at these things because we're like, oh, everybody goes through that, or, there's nothing to look at in this. But to me, it's like coaching. Like if something is not working, how can you effectively, work through the quality of that issue, whatever that issue might be. I mean, if you're not getting along as a couple or as a family, the quality of life or the quality of that relationship, then it doesn't exist, and it calls for, let's get help for it. But a lot of times people or couples, they're like, we don't need help for this. And especially men, it's very hard to, the whole concept of go to therapy or go to mental health or asking for help or support. People who are, and I've been on shows where dads, or men focus on mental health, and those men are so much more attractive because they can communicate, they were emotionally intelligent, they are, like, oh, it's okay to have emotions, talk about it, work through it, and have a good quality of life or marriage or relationship.
Exactly.
That's so much more attractive.
Exactly. I completely agree. Oh, that's such a good point. I want to pivot a little bit, and I want to ask you this question. It's one of the questions that I ask all my guests when they come on the show, and it's one of my last questions for you. And it's, how can someone create a little bit more happiness in their day every day starting today?
I like that question. I think one of the biggest things in terms of happiness, I think personally, and the way I've learned life, is self-love. We're the first relationships we have with ourselves. So if we have a good relationship with ourselves, if we are in that, and to me, happiness is not a state of being. It's a identity that it's like, if you do something that makes you happy, then at next moment you do something else, or something didn't go your way, then you become unhappy. I think happiness is much broader and bigger than that, where if in life you are happy as a person, but there are things that you need to work through or work at, then you work at it, and overall you live a blissful life where you're content. To me, happiness equates content, where it's like, if you are appreciative of the things that you do have, if you're appreciative of the moments and the memories that you do create, then those moments last forever. But if you don't know how to live that life or create those for yourself, then you'll always be chasing something bigger, better, and you're in the state of lack and not abundance. So I think it's really important to just appreciate and be grateful for the moment and what you have now, and continue to work towards, what you will or might one day. Because there are a lot of people who have a lot of wealth or are very successful, and money doesn't buy time, energy, or happiness. So it's really important to create that state of mind and that sense of content for oneself in order to be like that and have that outlook on life.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I agree with you. I think that happiness is more of like a state. Like I describe happiness as similar to you, like you said, content. I say peace. You know what I mean? Like different words for sort of describing the same inner feeling, right?
Yes,
I love that. I love that. Well, you know what? You're the one in this conversation who's the licensed therapist. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I may have found the definition for happiness. No, I'm just kidding.
No, but that's just my definition and my perception of what happens.
Absolutely.
Because, I don't, like you were saying earlier, you can't be expected to be happy all the time, because that's just manic. That in itself is a mental illness, and that's not okay. But wanting to be happy and peaceful and content with where you're at, what is happening in the now, and knowing what that feeling is like, and not chasing after that dopamine or that pleasure, or that thrill that we seek every so often. I think then there's something that's off, because it's really important that we appreciate what we have now, because no matter where we get, no matter what our goals are, no matter how successful, no matter how much money, we will always be, in a place where it's not enough. And at some point, life teaches you a lesson where it's not enough, and you get to a place where you learn that, what, it's okay.
It was enough.
Yes.
I love that. Where can our listeners find you and connect with you?
Thank you. So I am very very present on IG. My handle is @gpatelcounseling.com, or @gpatel.counseling. And I am also on Facebook @gpatel counseling. I post on IG and on Facebook interchangeably, but then I'm also reachable on gpatelcounseling.com or gpatelcounseling@gmail.com. You can go on my website and find me. My website is called gpatelcounseling.com. Write me anytime, get a hold of me. I'm in the process of creating my blog community where people can sign up, and I want to create a community of people that are inspired by each other and, looking to thrive and become the best versions of themselves. So together we can create a nation that's, kinder, sweeter, and more helpful towards each other, as opposed to being competitive and, not caring. I think it would be a much nicer place.
I love that so much. Count me in for the community. I'll be there. Sign me up. Anything that's like kindness and more empathy and more love towards each other, towards yourself. I am there for it. And yep, absolutely. You have to let us know sort of what happens with that, and we can share with the podcast community as well.
Oh, and I also recently started my own podcast. It's called Traumatic Transformations with Gunjani Patel. And I just started it. So I'm in the beginning part of the journey. I'm on week 7, but I'm really excited. So
that's big.
I wish to continue forever, but I just started, so I'm really excited for this new endeavor. It's like my baby passion project. And it's really
I love it. I love it. I mean, honestly, 7 weeks, that's pretty amazing. A lot of people tend to give up after like week 2. So, I mean,
that's good to hear.
Consistency is key, right? And like anything that you do. Yeah. And if you're, if you enjoy it and you're giving people this whole other platform, to learn and to educate and to help people feel like they're a little bit less alone.
Yes. Because in that podcast, I wanted to come from a place of not a therapist, but someone who has been through stuff, just like everybody else goes through stuff. And I wanted to bring in guests who've been through stuff and back and, literally back. So I wanted to, it's dedicated to people who are looking to help, find hope, peace, and purpose after a traumatic life phase or life event, and not just for people who are looking to survive, but people who are looking to thrive and become better at every day of themselves. Because a lot of times we just compare ourselves to other people and we feel like, oh my God, our life is not the greatest. But it's like, what if we were only 10% better than we were yesterday? So, you can, and some of the guests that I bring are just amazing people who've been through so much stuff and now paying it forward through their journeys, through their work, through their books, through their stuff that they do. And it's so amazing to be connected to all of them.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here today and for coming on the show.
Oh, it's more than my pleasure. Thank you so much. You have such an amazing energy about you, and I'm so inspired by some of the stuff that you are doing. So really looking forward to be connected.
Thank you. Me too. I'm really, really looking forward to everyone hearing this. I mean, if you're listening to it now, you are listening to it, and I hope you've enjoyed every single word. And please be sure to share this episode with someone needs to hear this message. Let's make the world a little brighter. And remember that happiness happens when you're least expecting it.
Yes.
Well, it looks like we have made it to the end of this episode. I'm so proud of you for tuning into this episode, and I'm so grateful that you joined me in this incredible conversation. I would be so grateful if you took a quick second to rate and review the podcast and let me know what you loved the most. I also love hearing from you, and I would love to know your thoughts on this episode. So feel free to tag me online or let me know that you're listening. I'm so excited to connect with you. Wishing you a beautiful day ahead, and remember that happiness happens when you're least expecting it.